All right, Mary, take it away. Thank you.
All right, got it. Thank you. And Dr. Helms, Manuel, I'm not expecting you to present. I want to highlight a little bit some of the work that we might do together. And that was some of my intention in having you here today. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. I didn't want you to be caught off guard. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Just a moment here. So. Okay, so let me rearrange a little bit. Okay, so my name is Mary Martinez Wenzel. I am based here at ODE as the Director of Multilingual and Migrant Education. I had the pleasure of working with Beth a few years back when I was at ODE through the DACA collective. So this is our outline today. We're going to go kind of big picture on what's the multilingual and migrant education team, why does international transcript evaluation matter, what are some of the goals of the session. Then we'll dig into some of the Oregon policies and guidance in this area, which you may or may not be available. Then we'll have some time doing a breakout activity in small groups so that you can share with one another how you handle transcript evaluation in your schools and districts, and then we'll come back together. So hopefully it's a mix of like learning and interactive. So the team that I head up at ODE is very new. I just started in April of this year, and we've grown tremendously over the past couple months. We're able to hire several amazing team members, really embodies our commitment to and investment in supporting our multilingual and migrant students in Oregon. We have about 100,000 students in the state who have either are currently or formerly designated as English learners, and the number fluctuates. I think this year closer to 15,000 students who are designated as migrants, meaning that they work in agriculture or their families do, and they move and change school districts related to work in agriculture or fishing. So those are the students we really focus on and serve with our team, as well as students who are immigrants, newcomers, refugees. We've had a lot more refugees and asylum seekers coming to Oregon in the past few years. And then I'd say a growing focus for our team is also students in dual language programs who may overlap with the other student groups, may also be English speakers. There's quite a mix in dual language programs. So big picture, things that live in our office include our Title III federal programs for English learners, which are very tied to civil rights for students designated as English learners. Our other federal program is Title IC, migrant education, and then the multilingual initiatives. And I would say that the topic of transcript evaluation is kind of in that realm. So the team's grown, so we're now 12 staff members. A couple of us are here today. So we have Diego Contreras Medrano, who is our research analyst, a senior researcher focused on migrant education, and Jennifer Fontana, who is our multilingual education specialist. Overall, the team is multilingual. We have 9 Spanish speakers and fluency in 7 additional languages, and just a tremendous depth and breadth of experience. So today we also have with us Manuel Vasquez Cano, who I had the pleasure of working with in my previous job over at Education Northwest. He and I had worked together quite a bit. I was looking, Manuel, at some of our work, and it's going back to like 2016, 2017, when we first started working up in Washington State with a collective of districts in the King County, kind of Seattle and south of Seattle area, digging into their practices for transcript evaluation. Manuel and I have also done some work really thinking about how we could collaborate binationally with Mexico on developing more systems and resources for transcript evaluation. And today we have Dr. Creighton Helms with us from Jervis School District, who recently approached me with a similar idea, saying like, could we get together and start developing kind of a reference guide or tool specifically to support transcript evaluation for students from Mexico. So this is an idea that we're really hoping to move forward on at the Oregon Department of Education, possibly working with you and a collective of like counselors and people who work directly with transcripts. So we have, I'd say, 3 goals for today. One of the things I would like to come away from is with a better understanding of what you need and what your perspectives are, people who are working directly with international transcripts. I'm hoping that we can all deepen our understanding of the guidance that Oregon has in this area, and then just grow our own knowledge of the field of international credentials evaluation, because this is a field that is professionalized. They have associations and their own conferences and a lot of resources. And I want to just briefly introduce some of those resources to you, which you may already be using. You may have additional resources, but those are the goals. So one, I know we already did a little chat intros, but I would love to do another little chat blast to just know from you how you currently work with transcripts, whether you are someone who translates them, analyzes them, requests them from other countries. But if we could just all take a minute and share in the chat what we currently do with international transcripts. I should have put that on the slide. That would be very helpful. And I can model. I don't really work directly with transcripts. I've worked on developing resources and guidance and setting some guidelines for the state. Okay, and I see we have So, yeah, I see we have a few people who work directly with analyzing, reviewing, and advocating around transcripts. And Beth, it looks like you're fielding some questions about resources and organizations, and I'd love to trade notes. I have pulled together my list. I'll be sharing some of those today. All right, so it looks like we've got a good mix of experience, people who have worked at different levels of the system, and directly with transcripts. So I could probably learn a lot from all of you too. Okay, looks like it's slowed down a little, so I'm going to move on to my next slide. Okay. So why does international transcript evaluation matter? I'd say I first really got interested in this issue probably about 10 years ago when I was in graduate school at UCLA, and I was working with UCLA Civil Rights Project, Proyecto de Derechos Civiles, on a pilot demonstration project with newcomer immigrant students from Mexico and Central America. And one of the things that I noticed, we were working with 4 different school districts, 2 in the LA area, 2 along the border, like Chula Vista and kind of Calexico, Brawley. And there was a huge amount of variation in what happened with students' transcripts. Most students were coming in at 10th grade, in Mexico, it's more of a junior high model. So a lot of students start high school in 10th grade, they'd already done 9th grade. And some districts were transferring in a lot of credits in their core areas, and students were graduating at much higher rates at some of those schools along the border. Some schools had a much more kind of conservative approach to credit transfer. And in my project, I was really working with kids who had recently graduated or not graduated. I was seeing kind of the downstream effects of what happens when students have their transcripts evaluated in different ways. So I see this as like a researcher evaluated by training. It's a key source of data and evidence and documentation for us to understand prior schooling experiences. And these kinds of decisions that happen very early on for newcomers can have a very profound effect on what kind of access they have to classes in high school, whether your course placed in algebra course or where you end up in the math sequence, what kinds of credits you have on your transcript, cumulative record. We have pretty high percentage of students who've been English learners in Oregon graduating with a modified diploma instead of a standard diploma. That goes back to kind of what kind of credits they've been able to accrue. That also has implications for post-secondary options and opportunities. And grades and GPA, if all of your prior learnings transferring in as a pass, no pass, and an elective credit, it doesn't really reflect, your prior work. So I'd say when it's a high functioning transcript evaluation system, things working really well, students would be able to access grade level core classes that are pitched at the exact right level, building on their prior learning and knowledge, with credit on their transcript or cumulative record in the right content areas for subjects that they have mastered, of course, taking into account our Oregon-based content standards, and a GPA that, is really an accurate reflection of all of their work, both in the US and internationally. But I've also seen, how things go when the system's really not working well. A big one is when linguistic bias creeps in. And students, because they're still learning English, you could still be a superstar student. But schools sometimes think, well, the student's still learning English. It might be able to help them to repeat this course, take a little more biology, algebra. But that can be really discouraging for students, especially layer on top. Sometimes our newcomer students are a little bit older for the grade level. They may be unaccompanied minors. Some of them may even be kind of maturity wise a little bit older than peers their own age because they've taken on more work and responsibilities. And I've talked to students who just said I felt just infantilized, or almost like I was going backwards because, I was already doing pre-calculus. I came here and now I'm in this, remedial algebra class. It's not challenging. And we know, if you follow the research on high school dropout, that these kinds of things are the kinds of things that put students more on the path to disengaging and potentially leaving school. So, it's interesting. A lot of the system level issues that can happen for newcomer immigrant students can sometimes kind of replicate at the post-secondary level when you think about what happens to students transferring from a community college to a 4-year. Often those systems aren't perfectly aligned, so students might lose credits, or the credits transfer in, but they transfer in an elective area, and students may not actually need more electives. They might already have too many electives, because they might think, oh, this newcomer, let's give them the ceramics class, and a few other things that might be a little bit less language dependent. And then the GPA, which can be really important for accessing scholarships or post-secondary opportunities. It might not really reflect what they can do and what they've done. So one thing that I think, Manuel and I really emphasized in our work in this area is that we have to be very intentional about interrupting this tendency to conflate English proficiency with academic ability when we're thinking about prior schooling, and interrupt those kinds of assumptions, often from people who have the best of intentions, right? Thinking students might benefit from repeating a course, get more exposure to English, maybe thinking like, K-12 education's free, if they, college is expensive. And one thing that surprised me and concerned me that Manuel and I learned from our previous work in Washington is that some districts actually differentiate how they will handle prior schooling depending on the language of instruction. We interact with some districts up in Washington state that kind of had one set of rules for, say, a student from Singapore, where most instruction was in English. All those credits could kind of transfer in wholesale in a different way, or maybe a student who is from a private school where more of the instruction was in English. They would provide more leniency or credit transfer for classes that were taken in English. But our content standards, for math, social studies, science, those are not English language content standards. So we really need to be careful about conflating English proficiency with academic ability when it comes to newcomers and international transcripts. So we'll dig in now a little bit to some of our Oregon policies and guidance in this area. So in Oregon, our administrative rules, which are set by the State Board of Education, lay out 4 different options for students to earn credit. So that could be evidence generated in courses, classes that people take, maybe at a high school here in Oregon, and the grade that they get and the credit that's associated with that. We also, by state rule, can award credit based on assessments. So a student could take an assessment to demonstrate their proficiency, be awarded credit for that. Collections of evidence of student learning scored against like a rubric that's tied to state standards is another valid way of awarding credit. And then we have the 4th one, evidence of prior mastery, and that could be through transcripts or a certification training, letter, diploma, all of these are valid methods of awarding credit. So in the last legislative session, Oregon legislature passed House Bill 2056, and that became law on January 1st of this year. It's called Access to Linguistic Inclusion. That law is pretty significant because it changed the diploma requirement in Oregon from a 4-credit English requirement to a 4-credit language arts requirement. And in the guidance, Oregon has made it very clear that we are not requiring language arts to be English language arts. And our colleagues in Ben Wolcott and Tina Roberts have done a really nice job putting together resources. You've probably seen them on the website. The guidance is pretty robust and detailed about how transfer credits and grades should be handled. And we've got a nice little set of guiding principles in that guidance that I worked on developing actually a couple of years ago, working with a couple of districts in Oregon who had done a fair amount of work in transcript evaluation. I'd say they lay out kind of 3 core areas, like how credits should transfer in grades, what to think about in terms of district policy, and then staff training. So this is kind of low-hanging fruit. And the first principle is that we should really just do our best to obtain missing transcripts, working closely with the families. Some strategies could include family interviews. Family interview and working with students could be used to reconstruct an academic transcript. There are some good resources out there for interview protocols. Reviewing documents and other sources of evidence can also be a strategy for dealing with missing transcripts, assessments in home language, and then working with the consulate, especially here in Oregon. We have the Mexican consulate in Portland. They have their Ventanilla de Educación and There's a deep, deep commitment in the Mexican government to support the education of Mexican nationals in the United States, and many resources that can be accessed by other students who are Spanish speaking who may not be Mexican nationals. That was actually, I'd say 20 years ago when I was first getting into education research and doing some binational work in Mexico and going and meeting with Mexican government officials in Mexico City. They were very clear with me that their role in education was to mitigate the racism that students from Mexico were experiencing in the US. And so you will see a very strong commitment from the Mexican government and the consulate to providing educational resources and tools to students in the US. So our second guiding principle from access to linguistic inclusion guidance is around support for staff members who are responsible for transcript evaluation. It's important to have training and professional development. This is transcript evaluation is a complex endeavor. Imagine we have so many different home languages in Oregon, close to 200, and the number of countries that students may be coming from is probably just as high. That's a huge level of complexity when you think about all the different schooling systems and languages the transcripts may be in. I'd say, ideally, there would be a core group of trained staff members to handle all the transcript evaluation for a district to have consistency across schools and years. And there are people who advocate for really centralizing transcript evaluation, maybe at the district office or newcomer center, to ensure more consistency. So I'm curious with this group, what kinds of training opportunities have you had for international transcript evaluation, if any? Yeah. And we could also, I thought this would be a bigger group, but we could probably also just kind of share out. So, yeah, like 32 people. So yes, please feel free to come off mute and share out any experiences you've had, or share them in the chat window. Or if you haven't had any experiences, share that too. That's also important to know. Well, I'm definitely seeing a theme here of no formal training. And that's not at all uncommon. This is often a very complex responsibility that's layered on top of professionals who've had a lot of training in some areas, but it's kind of a gap, it seems to me, in how we support registrars and counselors. And it's interesting how much of a difference you see between how international transcripts are handled in a K-12 or high school setting compared to a post-secondary setting, because universities are frequently handling international transcripts and have very formalized processes for validating those credentials and transcripts. So there's actually a lot out there that we can learn and draw from when it comes to transcript evaluation or credentials evaluation. And I will be sharing some resources in this slide deck. Oh, yes, Manuel has put one together too, and that's a great one. And I had a little Jamboard, actually. I wanted us to take just a moment. So considering that most of us have not had a lot of training in this area. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you would like to know. So I have this Jamboard activity. Going to pause the and I'll just do a quick demo of this. Okay. Okay, this is a little bit out of self-interest because I really want to know what you want to know, because now that Oregon has a team for multilingual and migrant education, we have more bandwidth to provide resources and training in this area. And so view only, change the permission. Okay, let me do that. You all now have editing rights. Okay. Yeah. What do you, and if you, way to add a sticky note is just click here on the little post-it. You can pick your color and then put in what you know and what you would like to know, and we'll see what comes together. And this will really help us think about how we might prioritize training and development of resources for all of you. So let's just take about 3 minutes to fill out this Jamboard.
Hello, I'm just logging on. I'm not sure what we're doing. Does anyone have the agenda that they can put in the chat, please?
Yes, hi, welcome. We're doing a little Jamboard activity on international transcript evaluation, and I know Beth has the agenda link too.
Got it added.
Good work. And I'm kind of just moving things around where I'm seeing some thematic kind of clustering. So, looking at, what I see from the group around things you want to know, there's interest in, training and accessing training resources, supporting counselors, and, need for information, what are the key laws? We don't really have, I think, much in the way of laws other than those OARs that I showed on the screen around allowable sources. There might be a little bit to glean from transfer students, I think, military students and students who come out of state that might apply here, and I can look that up after today. And then people want to know what best practices, and there's some technical questions around things like fractional credit for incomplete school years. I see this question about missing transcripts without a paper record. Yeah, that I would say for that question, it kind of goes back to looking at those OARs and seeing, are there any competency-based assessments that could stand in for transcripts, or collections of evidence that could be put together? If you don't have a transcript, are there any other things that could be put together to form a portfolio that could be scored against a rubric? And yeah, so this is great. There's a lot here, and it's clear there's a need, right? Because we're hearing there's not a lot of training in this area, and people want to know more. So that's what I'm going to talk a little bit more about next. I'll share my screen again. Okay. So there are tons of resources out there to learn about international schooling systems and credentials, and we will share this slide deck with all of these links with you. There's the International Education Research Foundation. They have some really nice publications, some of which are free that you can access, signing up for their website, you get access to their IERF Vault, which is a very information-rich resource. There are two kind of big professional associations for credential evaluation professionals. One is TASEP. They have a certificate program, so any counselor could complete that program and develop foundational knowledge of international credential evaluation, best practices, secondary education, in other countries. They have an annual conference too. I attended it last year. It was fully online. They might be back to in person now. TASEP also has an extremely active listserv where people share questions and kind of workshop problems of practice around transcripts. The other association I don't have on the slide is NASIS or NASIS. I don't know how to say it, but that's kind of the other big association for credentials evaluation. At the post-secondary level, the AACRAO, they have training opportunities for the evaluation of international credentials. Some of these aren't going to translate as well because, a registrar in a college context might be looking more to see, does this high school diploma meet our admission standards? But some of it may kind of go down to that course level and be really applicable. There's educational credentials evaluators they have a ton of trainings and resources. There's a 1 hour kind of intro video that's available on their website. And then when I went to that TASEP conference last year, I went to a workshop with a credentials evaluator named Shelby Clearly from Walden University. She has a very, very extensive blog that includes some really nice resources specific to Mexico's educational system from her conference. So I think She's been building out her resources for years and just put them all on her blog. So help is out there. And let's see. Because this is such a complex endeavor, so many different schooling systems, not a lot of standardized training for counselors or registrars in this area. Ideally, I think, a small group is going to be designated to handle transcript evaluation, have as much consistency as possible across schools and years. I would advocate for really thinking more about more centralized approaches. I know some districts like Eugene 4J has transcript evaluation occurring at the district office. Newcomer Center, if district has that, could be another place for transcript evaluation to occur. School-based evaluation by individuals tends to result in more variation. Another option is to pay. There are many external credentials evaluation providers who evaluate transcripts on a fee basis. A couple years ago, we did kind of curate a list of transcript evaluation providers and found out which ones did high school course by course evaluations and what the cost was. And I put that in the slide deck. These are the ones that we had. This information's not completely current because it was a couple years ago that we got the cost estimates, but you can see, big picture, the cost is starts at about 100, can go up to maybe 250 per transcript, and then it has the turnaround time. It's not like same day. Most of them are requiring a week, sometimes up to 2 weeks or even longer, but all of these credentials evaluation providers are certified and have met certain professional standards for evaluating transcripts and do this. So I think it's just something to think about, especially if you have a transcript that's very unusual and challenging to navigate, to know that there are experts out here who do this for their profession. One of our core guiding principles in Oregon is that courses taken outside of the United States should be judged solely on their academic merits. So I'm a little bit like a broken record, but English language proficiency should not have any bearing on how transcripts are evaluated. That is a completely separate piece of students' backgrounds. We want to see course credit equivalencies and credit transferring in the same content area and subject for that credit in that area with an equivalent letter grade whenever possible. This is kind of aspirational. I know most districts don't have this, but ideally, districts would have a clear policy and process in place, articulated, in writing for international transcript evaluation. This list is not exhaustive, but these are some of the things for districts that do have a clear policy. Los Angeles Unified is one that would be laid out in a policy, who does it? Is it the district office? Is it a registrar, counselor? What's allowable in terms of substitutions and waivers, nuts and bolts about recording credits on the CUME record, guidelines on converting grades to the 4.0 scale. Some districts have caps on how much credit can transfer in. That's especially relevant, say if you have someone coming in and they're a senior, is there a requirement for a minimum number of credits that need to be completed in the US for an Oregon diploma? And then the appeal process. I think that's an important one, especially those of you who are thinking about the advocacy piece. If someone disagrees with how the transcripts were evaluated, how do they navigate that process? One suggestion that was made at a workshop I did on this a couple of years ago was for the School Boards Association, like OSBA, to develop a model policy in this area, which could be one approach we could think about in Oregon, because I think a lot of districts would like to see a good example And, at this level, it's a little like abstract. And like there's that Los Angeles Unified example. It's an example. I don't think it embodies like all of our equity values. It's maybe a little bit on the more conservative side. But it is an example. Some states have some transcript evaluation guidance embedded within like toolkits or guidance for newcomers, but there's not a ton out there from what I know. So thinking about our access to linguistic inclusion guidance. Oh, I see there's a note in the chat. Wondering if local ESDs can take on transcript evaluation as an optional service for paying districts. I have that wondering as well. It does seem like it could be a very logical role for the ESDs, given their kind of regional role. I don't know if that's happening anywhere in the state. Does anyone in this group know?
We have a few ESDs that are here.
Mm-hmm.
Is anybody maybe wanting to speak up? So Beth, I see your message. You don't have anything like that at your district, your ESD.
No, but I was thinking the same thing, that I wonder if it is something that an ESD could do to provide for especially those smaller districts.
Yeah. Do we have any other ESDs here this morning? No. Yeah, great idea.
Yeah, it's also an area where migrant education programs might be a partner. We have 18 regional migrant education programs here in Oregon, and they all have graduation specialists. And I do know that some of those graduation specialists take on responsibility for transcript evaluation. And we will, ODE provides support to that group of graduation specialists, and we will be providing them with some training and resources in this area this year. Going back to the access to linguistic inclusion guidance, I think it does have some very important guidance to think about when on the context of transcript evaluation. So we have built in more flexibility through that policy. So that means that an advanced, if someone was taking English like as a world language outside of the US, it's possible that it could transfer as a language arts credit. Also an advanced ELD class taken here in Oregon could count as a language arts credit. That is completely baked into the system in California. California has for four-year college admissions their A through G requirements, and at the state level, they've made it very clear that an advanced ELD can substitute for ninth grade English language arts, and that is accepted system-wide, for Berkeley or UCLA or any 4 years. We also, in our access to linguistic inclusion, have built in a little more flexibility around ELD and ESL classes counting as a world language credit. If you're looking at international transcripts and see literature, language arts course taken in Spanish or any other language, that can transfer in as a language arts credit as long as the standards have been met. We just always go back to the standards. Very few of the Oregon English language arts standards have much to do with the English language. Most of the things related to like reading and writing and critical thinking can be demonstrated in any language. And there's also some flexibility that came out of access to linguistic inclusion for some like double dipping and getting 2 credits for single courses. So these are all things to be very attuned to when you're thinking about international transcripts. And yeah, and I was just looking at the thoughtful chat from Dr. Helms about ESDs regionally specific to needs and newcomers from international locations may tend. Yeah, that's true, and that's kind of how migration patterns go. People tend to go where they have a connection, whether it's like a loved one or a work connection. So we do see that there those patterns of where people move and settle. Okay, so I've been talking a lot, and we're now going to shift gears into a breakout activity. Is Michelle Buyas here today? Okay, well, I wanted to give Michelle a shout out for providing us with some really thoughtful questions that are shaping our breakout activity. So I'm going to just do a quick.
Mary, for breakout rooms, what are you
Yes.
thinking? Do you want like small group? Do you want a little bit larger?
Let's see, I think smaller. How many do we have? We have 27. Let's do like 5 breakout groups.
Okay.
And we've set up a Google Doc that is view only, so you will need to make a copy of it to work from within your group. And this is really digging into more local practices. So I'll just quickly share it with everyone so we can look at it together. All right. So, okay, so in your notes, please just note which group you're in and identify some roles for facilitator, note taker, timekeeper. I think we'll take probably about 20 minutes on these. It'd be really helpful if you could list who's in the group. And then these are some of the questions. So really digging into local practices, like what does transcript evaluation look like in your school or district? I think we're thinking here about kind of the sequence, like at what point are the transcripts evaluated relative to things like the language use survey or language proficiency screening or other things that might happen right at registration and enrollment. And some questions about English proficiency and how that may or may not impact course placement. Also math knowledge and how that is assessed. Grade placement. This is an area where I don't think we really have clear guidance at the state level, so it would be really interesting to hear how this is being handled at the local level, and then what happens after registration and enrollment, what supports are out there. So yeah, so I think we'll take about 20 minutes to work through those questions as a group, and then we'll come back and share out.
Great. Mary, could you put the link to that document?
Oh yeah.
And then I will send everybody to random breakout rooms.
Great. Yes, hi, welcome back, everyone. I hope that was a good discussion. So we're hoping that, I don't know if you all have edit access for the agenda. I do not, but yeah, we want to make sure that we capture all of your notes and in the agenda. So if you could
want
add.
to share in the chat, that'd be great. Share your notes from your breakout rooms in the chat, and I will add it to our agenda so we can go back to it, look at each other's, and then yeah, Mary can wrap us up.
Yeah, so let's just kind of go through the groups. So we have 5 groups, right? So, and you should probably all have a designated reporter. So let's start with group 1.
Would be me. Let me pull up just the questions. So different districts do different things. Larger district, we do have, I see some notes. So we have a process for families to be welcomed either at the district level or at the building level. And then we also had a different district in our group where it was the ELL coordinator who helped to welcome the families and collect the necessary documents. The English proficiency, the ELPA can be used, but determining what the student's proficiency is to place them in the correct language class. As far as the other like math or other content areas, there wasn't really a consistent process for evaluating a student's level for math. So it could be anywhere from working with the math department or placing the student in the best guess of the class and changing as needed. And then the age of a student determines the placement. And there seems to be good supports for our Spanish-speaking students. For students with other languages coming in, I think there's a need to build those supports in those areas.
Great, thank you, Heather. How about group 2?
I didn't look at our group numbers, so I don't, do you, Mari, do you, okay.
I think I was part of that group too. I can try and summarize quickly. Steps and sequence for newcomers. We talked about networking with our welcome centers and our ELL and doing some preliminary testing potentially with the ELPA and connecting them to resources within those groups. English proficiency, how do we determine their proficiency? Again, with the ELPA is part of that. I'm just going to try and go quickly. Math knowledge. There was a lot of, I think within our group, some of us were more confident about understanding what the process was. I know I specifically I felt like I needed to know more and learn more about it. But a lot of time we worked with ELL departments and math departments, and sometimes those math knowledge assessment would be done by our math staff with the help of ELL teachers. Might change placement in the first couple weeks. What determines grade placement? Most of the time we were saying that was the age of the student. And then the last question, what supports are provided for newcomer students after registration and enrollment? Family liaisons, school counselors, ELL staff are all part of the support after registration. There's also some schools and districts with more intensive newcomer programs that help support students and families with trauma and wraparound services.
Thank you, Will. And I see Beth is looking for your notes. She's doing a great job plugging those into the agenda. And so do we have a representative from group 3?
I'm gonna maybe take a risk here if nobody else is chiming up and I don't know my group number, that I might be group 3. Is that a safe risk to
Go
take?
for it. Yeah.
Okay. So we'll get our notes plugged in. I think we had kind of a free discussion as well a little bit, but you know, we had a diverse representation of small districts, a mid-sized district, larger district, and so resources were kind of across the board in terms of steps and sequences of newcomers when they enroll. How do we determine proficiencies? Those kind of things. I would say there was obviously echoing a lot of what others had shared, that those districts that have more resources tend to have things like you know, dedicated newcomer programs or ESOL programs where if they speak little to no English, they are kind of put into one of those sheltered instruction type of formats until they can build some level of proficiency. Whereas, you know, in a district of my size, we're a monolingual English teaching environment without any newcomer dedicated programs or self-contained classes. And so, you know, they will register with us if they're coming from, you know, a native language that we have somebody on staff. We will try to find and pair them up and do our best, but that's not always the case. And so, you know, it feels like in many in many respects, it's kind of cobbled together where we will do our best to enroll them. And obviously, if they're coming from a K-5 level, we put them in a grade that we believe that their birth certificate would tell us they would be in. But we've even found that, we placed a child in 4th grade only to realize that they were 12 or 13 years old. And then we have to quickly shift and realize, we should actually probably have it at the middle school instead. And so it's just kind of a case by case basis. We get them into classes and rotations that we think is best. We have a limited number of ELD teachers at different levels. And so then they start to try to apply their resources, and then we do our best to support. Obviously, bigger districts have slightly more in terms of maybe family advocacy and things like that. And we have that at a smaller capacity, but it's probably a pretty similar, process that's been described by others. We're doing our best, I think, as everybody is, but it just never quite feels like it's enough.
Thank you. And then we know we have notes from group 4. Is anyone from group 4 able to share out?
I can share out from group 4. We had a small group with representation from Hillsborough School District and Douglas ESD. And so we also had a similar conversation around, availability of resources. In Hillsborough, there are graduation coaches who collect transcripts, and there's a process by which those transcripts are evaluated. For students who speak less common languages, often a professional agency is contracted to evaluate those transcripts and provide that information. The ELPA is used to determine English language proficiency. As far as math goes, some math assessments have been translated into Spanish, but that was definitely an area of need for some more information about how those credits and that knowledge is determined. Age is the way by which students are placed in a particular grade level. And as far as what supports are provided to newcomer students, that is something that's determined at the local school level. And again, that level of support depends on the size of the school, the district, and the availability of staff members that can support those students.
Great. Well, thank you all for all of your engagement today. Beth and I had a little chat in between, and we very much want to get a lot of these resources curated and up on the ODE website, but we'll in the short term be sharing the slide deck and everything that we went over during today's session. And thank you for all of your notes. We'll be looking at them, and it's going to very much inform how we move forward on this topic.
Mary, thank you again for being here and your information and all the resources. Super excited to share that with everyone. And so that will be coming out soon after this meeting. And hope you all have a lovely holiday. We'll see you in the new year, and we'll have updates from the Oregon School Counselor Association around their advocacy work. You'll get to meet our new socio-emotional learning specialist. Well, she won't be new. January, it'll actually be a year, but at ODE, she's pretty new. So we're excited to tell you about the work underway with the socio-emotional learning standards and framework. And then we'll be able to give you some other updates and things that are happening and hear from all of you. So thank you for today being here, and just appreciate all of you. And we'll see you in the new year. Well, thank you. Reach out if you have any questions too. Oh, and there was somebody needed to give share. Laura, are you still here?
Yes, I have a
Sorry,
real
Laura.
quick, no worries. I have a real quick announcement for those that are still on the meeting. Dr. Heather Hadjaba and I are answering the call for providing support to school counselors in Oregon. And so we're hosting our first school counselor support meeting on Zoom on December 12th at 5 o'clock. So I put the Zoom link in the chat box. If you're willing to help us spread the word, all school counselors are welcome. We just want to provide a space for them to network with each other and provide support and resources. So we're just getting this started, and we'd love to have your help getting the word out. Thank you. Thank
That's
you,
great,
Beth.
Laura. Thank you. I'll add that to the agenda as well. And when I
Oh,
send
great.
a follow-up, I'll make a mention of it.
Oh, thank you, Beth. Thank
Yeah,
you so
thank you.
much. Thank you.
All right. Thank you
Bye.
all.